For 22-year-old Melinda Vasilije, a breakup wasn't an ending, it was a relentless siege. She couldn't escape the shadow of her ex-boyfriend, Ager Hasan, who refused to accept her decision. Believing one final conversation could grant her peace, she agreed to meet for closure. But that night, the door didn't close on a painful chapter. It opened into a scene of unimaginable horror. When her friends returned, they found Melinda's lifeless body. The man who was supposed to give her closure had vanished into the night, leaving behind a bloodbath and a deafening silence. But Ager Hasan didn't just run, he logged on. As a manhunt began, a bizarre and chilling spectacle unfolded online. From the shadows of Reddit and Instagram, he began posting his version of events, a twisted narrative of self-defense and victim blaming that captivated and horrified a global audience. He wasn't just a fugitive, he was a digital ghost, taunting everyone from the palm of their hands. While the world watched his online activity, Hasan slipped across the US border, turning a local tragedy into an international manhunt. It would take months of tracking his digital and physical footprints to finally bring him into custody. But his capture was only the beginning of another nightmare, a grueling trial that would force Melinda's devastated family to relive every horrific detail, shattering their world all over again. So how did a broken relationship escalate to this? This is the story of Ager Hasan's chilling campaign of control, his audacious flight from justice in the social media age, and the heartbreaking legacy of a young woman who simply wanted to be free. Welcome to Beyond the Crime. Hit subscribe to support the channel, it means everything. Let's dive right in. Melinda Vasilije was born on June 28, 1994, in Ontario, Canada, into a close-knit and supportive family. She grew up with her sister Christina and brother David. Her laughter was contagious, and her ability to lift people's spirits with humor and kindness was cherished by everyone who knew her. From a young age, Melinda dreamed of becoming a hairstylist, and she was actively pursuing that goal. But her biggest aspiration was to build a family of her own. She wanted to get married, build a strong relationship, and one day become a devoted mother to a son or daughter. Ager Hasan was born in Hamilton, about an hour's drive from Kitchener, to a family of Kurdish refugees. His parents had fled Iraq to escape large-scale aggressive acts and targeted ethnic purges against Kurds carried out under Saddam Hussein's regime during the Anfal campaign. Moving to Canada gave them physical safety, but the emotional scars of displacement and trauma followed them into daily life. Ager's childhood was far from peaceful. His home was marked by tension and episodes of aggression. He often witnessed family conflicts and hostile behavior. As a teenager, Ager himself became the target of a brutal assault by a group of men, leaving him physically and emotionally scarred. By the time he was 16, he had dropped out of school, retreating into himself and spending long hours alone. Two more incidents deepened his emotional struggles. In 2014, one of his close friends, Corporal Nathan Cirillo, lost his life during a terror-related attack at a ceremonial event in Ottawa. 2 years later, another friend named Alan ended his life by jumping off a ferry into Lake Ontario. Ager grieved these losses deeply. Despite his withdrawn demeanor, he was desperate for emotional connection and attention, something that would later play a significant role in his connection with Melinda. Two life stories shaped in radically different environments were about to intersect, launching a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Kitchener is located in southwestern Ontario, just a few dozen miles from Toronto and the US border. Once called Berlin, the city was renamed in 1916 during World War I. Today, it's a peaceful community with a strong infrastructure, respected schools, and a rich cultural scene. The highlight of the year is the large-scale Oktoberfest celebration, the biggest outside of Germany. With parades, beer, traditional music, and regional food, it attracts thousands of locals and tourists. Among Kitchener's local landmarks is the historic West Montrose covered bridge, known as the Kissing Bridge, which appeared in the 2017 film adaptation of Stephen King's It. Against this calm and orderly backdrop, Melinda Vasilije lived in a residential complex on Country Hill Drive. The quiet neighborhood, with its neat lawns and nearby parks, hardly seemed like the setting for a crime that would shake the entire city. They first met in 2016. Melinda was 21 at the time, already living on her own and steadily working toward her dream career. Ager lived in Hamilton, not far from Kitchener. Their initial conversations quickly turned into a friendship. They had a natural connection, shared interests, and kept finding reasons to see each other again. Within weeks, their communication became consistent, and their relationship became official. Melinda was upfront about her future goals. She wanted a serious relationship, a family, and eventually a son or daughter. Ager appreciated her honesty and initially agreed with her vision for the future. They both took steps to build a shared life, discussing everyday matters and responsibilities. On the surface, it looked like they had found a balance that worked, but soon differences began to show. Melinda valued stability, emotional boundaries, and a predictable rhythm in the relationship. Ager, on the other hand, craved closeness and constant reassurance. He reacted emotionally to pauses in communication or signs of distance. Even small disagreements about weekend plans, moments of jealousy, or how each of them spent their time started creating tension. At first, these incidents passed quickly, but they began to happen more often. Their conversations grew more intense. What once required just a short explanation now turned into long, repetitive discussions. Melinda pushed for clarity in their agreements and wanted space to manage her daily life independently. Ager, however, asked for more attention and involvement. Their text messages began to reflect these differences. With growing complaints about tone, emotional responses, and even who they were talking to, the emotional roller coaster became more pronounced. Calm periods were regularly interrupted by new arguments, each one more intense than the last. Their approaches to resolving conflict also diverged. Ager increasingly framed their disagreements as the result of cultural differences, asking her to be more understanding of his reactions. Melinda felt that it wasn't about background, it was about respecting boundaries, and she wanted clear, written agreements. The more she insisted on defined rules, the more he pushed back, asking for exceptions for the sake of the relationship. This led to repeated discussions about personal freedom, trust, and jealousy. By the end of the year, the so-called honeymoon phase was over. Their disagreements were no longer about details. They were about fundamental expectations. By early 2017, their relationship had reached a breaking point. It needed either clear structure or a painful end. Just before their one-year anniversary, Melinda made the decision to end the relationship. It was final and sudden. Hasan, however, took it as a temporary break and continued reaching out, while Melinda insisted on a complete separation. In February 2017, she traveled to Hamilton to return his belongings and settle practical matters. The meeting turned into a long conversation, and eventually they got back together on February 14th. It was a conscious choice to try again under clearly defined rules, but within weeks, it became obvious that their past issues hadn't gone away. On April 3rd, 2017, Melinda made her final decision. She ended things via message, stating clearly that she was unhappy and that the relationship wasn't working. Hasan reacted impulsively. He got in his car and drove to Kitchener, even though Melinda had already declined his earlier requests to meet. Once at her place on Country Hill Drive, he broke in through the backyard door. Inside the apartment were Melinda's roommate and several others. A frightened Melinda managed to take shelter at a neighbor's apartment upstairs while a confrontation began inside. Two men, her roommate's boyfriend and a neighbor, stepped in to calm Hasan down and tried to escort him out peacefully, avoiding any further escalation. What began as a verbal altercation quickly escalated into a physical confrontation. Neighbors called emergency services, and law enforcement arrived at the scene, detaining Hasan on site. He was formally charged with break and enter and 2 counts of assault related to his altercations with the men inside the apartment. Following his interrogation, Hasan was released under strict conditions. He was prohibited from contacting Melinda in any form: no phone calls, no messages, and no interaction through social media. Additionally, he was banned from entering the region of Waterloo, which includes the city of Kitchener. All of these restrictions were clearly communicated and explained to him. The purpose of these legal measures was to ensure Melinda's safety following the end of their relationship. What happened next would show whether Hasan would respect these rules or what the consequences would be if he didn't. Despite the court-issued restrictions, Ager Hasan continued to pursue Melinda. Over the course of 2 weeks, he sent her more than 60 messages. The tone of his messages ranged from compliments and pleas to frustration and subtle threats. He referred to their disputes as minor turbulence, attributing the conflict to cultural misunderstandings, and emphasized that there had been no infidelity or physical aggression in their relationship. He begged for another chance, insisted that he hadn't given up, and wrote that he couldn't walk away from the best part of his life. Most of his messages went unanswered. On April 20th, Melinda made it clear that she wanted all communication to stop. She asked Hasan to leave her alone, referencing the conditions put in place after the break-in. Her request stemmed from genuine concern for her own safety. But Hasan refused to back down. His messages grew more persistent, shifting from soft entreaties to irritation and demands to meet in person to explain everything and be understood. He even asked for a final hug for closure. These repeated messages were a clear violation of the no-contact order, but the stream of texts continued. Melinda was aware of his impulsive tendencies, but she also felt that only a face-to-face conversation could bring final clarity, something that might stop the pressure for good. She set conditions. The meeting would take place at her apartment, with others present, no leaving the room, and no extended one-on-one time. To ensure safety, Melinda arranged for 3 people to be in the apartment during the conversation: her roommate, her sister Christina, and a friend named Ilona. Their role was to stay nearby, monitor the situation, and intervene if needed. They also agreed the doors would remain open, Melinda would keep her phone close, and the conversation would be time-limited. This setup was a compromise, her right to peace balanced with the reality of Hasan's relentless attempts to make contact. The plan was in place. The next step was the meeting itself. The date was set for the evening of April 27, 2017. Later that night, another guest joined the women in the apartment, increasing the sense of oversight. Hasan was supposed to arrive at an agreed-upon time, but he was late. As the night wore on and he still hadn't shown up, it became clear the meeting might not happen after all. But around midnight, Hasan did arrive. Unexpectedly, the conversation began without any witnesses in the room. While others were still present in the apartment, Melinda and Hasan were alone. The first few minutes were calm, though the tension in the air was unmistakable. The roommate Ilona and another friend decided to step out briefly to avoid interfering and walked over to a nearby Burger King, leaving Melinda and Hasan alone. Security footage from the Burger King showed the women had spent about 30 minutes there. When they returned to the apartment on Country Hill Drive, they found the front door locked. Their knocks and calls went unanswered. After several attempts, the door finally opened, but what greeted them was an eerie silence. There were no signs of disorder in the living room or kitchen, but the scene in Melinda's bedroom was deeply disturbing. She was lying on the floor with multiple stab wounds. 2 kitchen knives were nearby, one close to her hand, the other slightly farther away. A later forensic report revealed that she had sustained 47 wounds to her face, neck, chest, abdomen, and arms, some of which were consistent with defensive injuries. A call to emergency services was made immediately, but when paramedics arrived, they could only confirm that Melinda had passed. Investigators found no signs of forced entry or struggle elsewhere in the apartment, indicating that the confrontation had occurred exclusively in the bedroom. The time of death was determined to fall within the window during which her friends had been away. By the time law enforcement arrived, Hasan was already gone. The vehicle he had driven was also missing from the scene. After leaving Melinda's apartment on the night of April 27th into the early hours of April 28th, Ager Hasan made his way toward the U.S. border. Surveillance cameras recorded his vehicle crossing the Peace Bridge, which connects Fort Erie, Ontario, to Buffalo, New York. The crossing was uneventful, and customs officials found no reason to stop him. His movements across state lines were later tracked using traffic cameras and automated license plate readers. At one point in Pennsylvania, he pulled into a Walmart parking lot where he removed his Canadian license plates and replaced them with another set, the origin of which later became a subject of investigation. By the morning of April 28th, Canadian authorities had already issued an alert with details of the suspect and his vehicle. However, since Hasan was now on U.S. soil, the case was transferred to American law enforcement, turning it into an international manhunt. At the crime scene, investigators had already gathered substantial evidence linking Hasan to the incident: fingerprints, blood traces, and multiple witness statements. But the priority was to prevent him from vanishing across a much broader territory. Fortunately, his highway movements left a digital trail. Surveillance along toll roads and major routes captured his direction, southbound. He made no apparent attempt to hide in remote areas or conceal his car. On the contrary, he stuck to major highways, suggesting he was in a hurry. Investigators believed he was trying to get as far from the border as possible before the alert reached law enforcement patrols. At this stage, it was still unclear where exactly he was heading, but his route passing through Pennsylvania and toward the southern USS later confirmed suspicions that his goal was to reach the Mexico border, but he wouldn't make it that far. Events would soon take a different turn. 3 days after the crime, now outside New York State, Hasan accessed the internet. He posted a lengthy message on Reddit detailing his version of what had happened on the night of April 27th. The post appeared in a popular subreddit and quickly gained attention, mainly because it included information that closely matched details from the ongoing investigation. Hasan claimed that his final meeting with Melinda started off peacefully, but escalated into an argument due to what he described as her aggressive behavior. According to him, she was the first to grab a knife, and he insisted he only acted in self-defense, attributing the multiple wounds to panic and fear. In his attempt to justify himself, he shifted focus to Melinda's personality, accusing her of being emotionally unstable, quick-tempered, and trying to provoke jealousy. He also mentioned her friends, portraying them as people who negatively influenced her decisions. Despite his repeated insistence that he was not a monster, the post included details that only someone present at the scene could have known, such as the positioning of the knives and the timeline when others left the apartment, further confirming his involvement. Law enforcement viewed the Reddit post as a form of indirect admission, as well as an attempt to influence public perception. In the comments, some users condemned him, while others asked follow-up questions. Hasan replied selectively, but kept the conversation going, which made his behavior during the manhunt even more unusual. This online confession drew significant media attention and quickly amplified public interest in the case. From that point forward, the search went beyond law enforcement. The story was now in the headlines on both sides of the border. His name and photos began circulating widely in the news. Later, Hasan shifted his online activity to Instagram, where he began curating the image of someone who, despite being pursued, remained in control. On May 20th, he posted a message expressing frustration over how the police were handling his case. He claimed they were portraying him as a fugitive, pointing to Nashville and suggesting he was trying to reach the Mexican border. In the same post, he urged people not to trust law enforcement and said that if he truly wanted to disappear, he could have done so already. His statements were bold and theatrical, calling himself smart and essentially claiming he could vanish without a trace. This bravado came with an apparent effort to shift the narrative from factual evidence to his own mindset and motivations. On June 18th, a series of new posts followed. 3 photos appeared in his feed, one of which showed him with Melinda. The caption read like a confession of long-standing love that, according to him, he never knew how to express. The emotional tone clashed with his earlier arrogance and seemed designed to evoke sympathy. However, he avoided mentioning the events of April 27th to 28th directly and didn't address the no-contact order or the fact that it had already been violated. These posts added no new facts but attempted to portray a softer, more remorseful version of himself, carefully crafted to avoid legal consequences. Then, on July 10th, a final set of posts appeared. The main message read, "I'm coming home," and included a statement about it being time to end the dark chapter of his life and give people the closure they deserve. He accompanied the post with a black and white photo of himself wearing a solemn expression. The message provided no details about when or where he would turn himself in, under what terms, or what exactly he meant by closure. It was essentially a public promise without specifics, leaving his intentions open to interpretation. Hasan used his Instagram posts to serve 2 main purposes: to control the narrative, countering the investigation and keeping the spotlight on himself, and to test the public's reaction, softening perceptions of his actions. For investigators, these posts were a valuable source of insight into his intentions and possible whereabouts. His behavior followed a clear pattern. Boldness and a show of independence alternated with attempts to gain sympathy, accompanied by vague promises of returning, which never materialized. On July 11, 2017, Ager Hasan was arrested in San Antonio, Texas, during a routine traffic stop. A patrol unit noticed a vehicle with license plates reported stolen out of Arkansas. When they ran the plates through the system, it triggered a theft alert, prompting officers to pull the car over for further investigation. Upon searching the vehicle, officers uncovered additional signs of criminal activity. Inside, they found around $600 in counterfeit bills, mostly in $20 denominations. The car itself also raised suspicion. It had been listed in alerts as a stolen vehicle. These findings were enough to detain the driver and bring him in for identification and further questioning through interagency channels. Once authorities confirmed that the man in custody was Ager Hasan, U.S. officials quickly coordinated with their Canadian counterparts. It was verified that Hasan was wanted by police in Kitchener in connection with the death of Melinda Vasilije on the night of April 27th to 28th. The situation triggered formal cross-border cooperation protocols. Canadian authorities were notified, and extradition procedures began. Because the case now involved counterfeit money, federal agencies, including the U.S. Secret Service, became involved. Hasan gave brief statements, but did not admit guilt to any of the charges. His presence in the U.S. was considered a lawful detention on domestic offenses, even as preparations for his extradition to Canada moved forward. At his hearing in San Antonio, Hasan's defense requested release on bail, citing a lack of prior convictions in the U.S. and his willingness to cooperate with the investigation. Prosecutors objected, pointing to his extended flight from authorities after the crime, illegal border crossing, use of fake plates and a stolen car, as well as possession of counterfeit currency. The court considered the full set of risk factors, including the likelihood of him fleeing again and the potential public safety concern. The judge denied bail. The ruling stated that the defendant had already demonstrated a clear intent to evade justice and had previously ignored legal boundaries. Until the extradition process was complete, Hasan remained in U.S. custody. Meanwhile, Canada submitted a formal dossier to support the extradition request, including details of the crime, witness statements, surveillance footage, and forensic evidence. Following his arrest in San Antonio, the transfer of Ager Hasan to Canadian authorities began. The legal process took several months, including mutual agreement under the bilateral extradition treaty, review of evidentiary sufficiency, and coordination with ongoing U.S. charges. Hasan remained in custody throughout this time. On January 5, 2018, he was extradited under escort back to Ontario to face legal proceedings in Canada. Formal charges were filed, and he was placed in a detention facility awaiting trial. Between 2018 and 2019, the case proceeded through the typical pretrial process for a serious felony preliminary hearings. Evidence disclosure, clarification of witness lists, forensic reports, and physical exhibits. Legal teams debated the admissibility of certain evidence, how it would be presented to the jury, and the order of witness testimony. Initially, the trial was scheduled to begin in 2019, but those plans were interrupted by the events of 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic brought court operations in Ontario to a near standstill, especially for in-person jury trials. Priority was given to urgent cases, while complex multi-episode trials were postponed. As a result, the trial windows for Hasan's case were repeatedly delayed. Throughout 2021 and 2022, the court calendar was adjusted multiple times, shifting dates, backup slots, courtroom assignments, and judge availability. By early 2023, COVID restrictions had eased significantly, and the court scheduled the main trial to begin on April 19, 2023 in Kitchener. By that point, the evidence file was comparable in volume to a full-scale homicide case, detailed forensic analysis of injuries, a timeline of events from that night, security camera footage, and numerous messages exchanged before and after the tragedy. This marked the end of a 6-year gap between Hasan's extradition and the start of legal proceedings. The delays were not due to re-evaluation of the case's merits, but to logistical hurdles and pandemic-related restrictions. Hasan's defense claimed it was not a planned act, but rather a case of self-defense. According to their narrative, the conflict erupted after Hasan admitted to having been involved with other women during past breaks in his relationship with Melinda. Allegedly, she grabbed a kitchen knife and tried to strike him in the face, but hit his hands instead. He reacted instinctively, blacked out briefly, and when he regained awareness, saw her on the floor and believed the danger had passed. So he left. A message he sent at 3:39 a.m. was presented by the defense as evidence of his belief that things might still be reconciled. Cuts on his hands were described by the defense as consistent with self-defense, and the multiple injuries were attributed to panic and chaotic motion in a confined space. The prosecution argued that it was a deliberate act. They cited witness testimony from her roommate, Christina and Ilona, who confirmed that Melinda was alone with Hasan in the room just before they left, and that there had been no signs of conflict prior. Surveillance footage from outside the apartment captured Melinda walking Hasan to his car around 1:45 a.m. He returned alone 10 to 15 minutes later and was seen running back to his car at about 2 a.m. He never called emergency services. Crucial to the case were the medical examiner's findings. The autopsy revealed dozens of wounds, 27 to the neck and 6 to the chest. 2 knives were used, one with a serrated blade, which was found damaged and lying near her, and a standard kitchen knife discovered near the exit. Melinda had clear defensive wounds on her hand. The prosecution argued that Hasan's cuts were not from defending himself, but resulted from his hand slipping on a blood-covered blade during the act itself. The court also reviewed the final messages exchanged between Melinda and Hasan. In their communication, Hasan showed recurring patterns of behavior. When Melinda asked for space, he would alternate between flattery, pleas, frustration, and promises to change. At the same time, he dismissed Melinda's boundaries, insisting they were meant to be and denying any toxic dynamics. He also attempted to undermine her trust in her friends, implying they had selfish motives. Melinda's messages, by contrast, showed no hesitation or indication of possible reconciliation. She was firm in her intent to end all contact. To the prosecution, the message history became part of a behavioral pattern. Escalating pressure after rejection, attempts to control time, space, and communication, manipulative explanations for conflicts, and efforts to discredit Melinda's close relationships. Investigators also closely examined Hasan's actions on social media following Melinda's passing. Offensive messages appeared on Facebook, targeting both her memory and her mother. These degrading posts diminished Melinda's identity and significance, adding another layer of pain for the grieving family. Prosecutors presented technical data linking these posts to Hasan's devices and accounts, including IP addresses, login times, and phone models that were used in his presence. The defense, however, claimed there was no direct proof he authored the posts, suggesting someone else might have accessed his accounts, perhaps due to known passwords or his unstable mental state at the time. Hasan's attorneys also argued that the posts should be excluded from the case, labeling them as unverified activity. Still, the prosecution maintained that these posts fit within the broader picture of Hasan's behavior following the crime. Provocative online presence, attempts to manipulate public perception, and inflammatory language. Even if some of the posts were written by someone else, their timing, tone, and the way they addressed Melinda's loved ones closely mirrored Hasan's established communication style. Including this material in the case strengthened the jury's perception of the defendant's character and showed that the emotional pressure on Melinda's family did not end with her death. For jurors, it wasn't just a series of isolated events. It was an ongoing pattern of behavior that disregarded the victim and her family's feelings. During the final phase of the trial, the court heard personal statements from Melinda's family and friends, describing the aftermath of her death. These statements weren't about legal arguments. They offered the jury and the judge a glimpse into how the tragedy changed the lives of those who loved her. Melinda's mother spoke first. Her voice was slow and filled with emotion. She paused several times to gather herself. She shared what everyday life felt like after the loss, waking up with the knowledge that her daughter was gone, and going to sleep with the same pain. She described how Melinda's absence created a void in their home, broke family traditions, and destroyed their sense of safety and belonging. She emphasized that the suffering didn't stop after the incident. It continued throughout the court proceedings, as they were forced to repeatedly hear the details of the crime, see graphic images, and listen to public discussions of Melinda's life presented in a distorted way. Melinda's friends described her as kind, warm, and always willing to help. Some expressed a sense of personal guilt, feeling that maybe they could have convinced her to end contact with Hasan once and for all, preventing that final meeting. Others shared memories of moments, trips, and future plans that were never fulfilled. The court listened to each impact statement without interruption. While these emotional testimonies did not affect the legal classification of the crime or the sentence itself, they became a powerful part of the process. They reminded everyone that behind the clinical language of charges and forensic reports were real people, lives permanently changed by what happened. After the final statement, the courtroom fell into a prolonged silence. The emotional weight of the moment was palpable, even among the jurors. After several weeks of hearings and deliberations, the jury delivered their verdict. Ager Hasan was found guilty of second-degree murder. This ruling confirmed that the intent to take a life had been established, but the act was not classified as first-degree, which would have required proof of premeditation. The court sentenced Hasan to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 16 years. That means the earliest possible date for Hasan to apply for parole would be in 2033. However, the judge emphasized that eligibility does not guarantee release. The decision will depend on a thorough evaluation of his behavior while incarcerated, evidence of rehabilitation, and whether he continues to pose a risk to the public. For Melinda's family, the verdict marked the formal end of a long and painful legal process, but it didn't bring a true sense of justice. Her loved ones stated that no sentence could ever bring her back or erase the trauma they endured. Even after the conviction and sentencing, one question lingered, one that may never have a clear answer. What really happened that night? Was it a sudden outburst fueled by yet another conflict, or was it the result of a decision that had been made long before the meeting ever took place? The court delivered its legal judgment, but the motives and the thoughts in Hasan's mind that night remain known only to him. For some, the evidence pointed to a spontaneous act of aggression. For others, it appeared to be calculated and deliberate. That question now lives outside the courtroom, in the memories of those who knew and loved Melinda. Thanks for watching. Smash that like button, drop a comment, and share to help grow the channel. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.